Scott Rosenberg is here. It's Antrea live. Okay, let's get started. Matt, you want to say hi? I have a Christmas friend here today.
Hey, everybody.
Matt wrote Cyclonus. It's the best network policy verification tool in the whole world.
Let me know if you want to hack on it.
Maybe next time.
Maybe upstream it or something like that.
Maybe we can get him to do a show. Scott, introduce yourself.
Hey guys. So I'm Scott Rosenberg. I work at TerraSky, based in Israel, and do a lot of stuff in the Kubernetes world, especially around Tanzu.
Are you all like the masters of digital transformation?
Exactly. You know. No. So we're a service integration or a systems integration company based in Israel, but also working in the States and in Europe. We're partners of VMware, Amazon, Google, and a bunch others, and really working hard in the cloud native world, public cloud and on-premise. And I'm the practice leader for cloud and automation at TerraSky, and leading the Tanzu portfolio from our side as well.
Okay, cool. And now, we're at Antrea. So here we go. Antrea, so 10. So there's a ton of links in here. So let's get started.
Yeah.
Huge thanks for coming. Me and Scott are working on actually Scott and Amim are working on the multi-OS
and some Windows stuff. Yeah.
Recipes. So that's going to be cool. Just FYI, folks. So framework. So if I go to Tanzu framework, so these will install both Windows clusters and Linux clusters side by side. I don't know. We have an issue somewhere here.
Yeah, it's like the fourth from the top.
Fourth from the top. Where is it?
Yeah. Add support for mixed Windows.
So Scott is collaborating with us upstream on this. So this is going to be a cool one. And so I just want to say one of the things I'm real excited about is the fact that we're actually, at VMware, we're developing Tanzu with people in the community like Scott, which is really cool. Like we're doing that for Windows, but I think more of that's going to be happening. So you got 100 links in here. We had the FeatureGate stuff that we were going to go over.
Yeah.
So let me show people that. So there's these new Tanzu feature gates. This is Shimon added these.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool feature. It's pretty cool because it allows us to basically enable to add beta features and alpha features behind feature gates so that they can come out in Tanzu distributions, and really just allow things to ship out quicker than they would be able to otherwise. So this is a really cool feature that just through the CLI, you'll be able to enable a bunch of feature gates for new cutting edge technology. I was looking
really
at excited to see where this will go.
When you showed me this yesterday, I thought it was cool because I hadn't looked at using these yet. And then the thing that I thought was really cool you were showing me was the fact that the convention they're following here is they're actually flagging them with beta versus regular, which means that your flags never go out of date. And we've seen this, it's really confusing in upstream, right? Like you have these feature gate flags and they're kind of constant throughout. But with the Tanzu feature gate flags, the flags themselves actually have a time gate on them. So as soon as you upgrade to a version where foobar is no longer beta, this flag is irrelevant. So you don't have this weird. And so Scott showed me this yesterday and I was like, this is really cool. I thought it was really cool in two ways. One, somebody outside of VMware was showing me how to a new feature in Tanzu that I didn't fully understand yet. So I was like, wow, this is really cool. But then the other thing that was cool is that this is genuinely cool because you've seen this in upstream where there's feature gates and people get really confused about when to enable them and when to disable them. And there are these constants that sort of follow you around forever. And so this is a really nice convention that folks came up with. I don't know who came up with this convention, but Shimon implemented it, so I guess he gets the points. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then we're looking at pausing reconciliation controllers. Now this is an interesting one. So Scott was showing me this yesterday, the way he swaps CNIs out in Tanzu, which is that he there's a pause annotation that you could put on a KApp instance, right? On a KApp managed reconciled application, and then you put that pause thing in there, and then you manually can go delete all the resources and then recreate them in some other way. I don't think a lot of people know about that. It was pretty intuitive to me because at one point someone on our team actually had to do that. But yeah, that's real interesting. Maybe once you fire up your terminal, you can just show us that really quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you've got all these links in here, and I feel like you've got so much stuff going on that maybe we should just jump into it, right? So
yeah, why not?
why don't you just
Let me
why don't
see
you
if I
just
can
show us
share.
everything? Why don't you just show us everything?
Awesome. Let's see.
You know, Scott is from Israel, by the way.
I am.
This is like this is our first multinational
Exactly.
Antrea live
so
show.
let's see.
And I'm on Christmas
Right.
break right now.
Yeah, so awesome. So yeah, let's take a look here. Let's see. Is my screen sharing now, Jay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, so in general, basically, there's one thing with the Antrea here that's actually really cool is NSX-T 3.2 just came out, and there's actually really cool integration that can be done between Antrea and NSX, which is really fun actually to take a look at.
I got to interrupt you really quick and say hi to people.
Yeah.
Marino
Sure.
is here. He's my friend from VMware, but he left. Marino, I just got back from the gym. You can be really proud of me. Para's here, and he's one of our new Kaping friends. Miss you too, Marino. You'll be really proud. You'll be really proud. I did like a 2.5-hour workout today and a 24-hour fast. Okay, Robert Clisterius, where are you from, Robert? You're new.
Robert's a close friend.
Ariel.
Friend.
Rajas is here. Rajas, what time is it in India right now? I didn't know you were ever going to show up, Rajas. And then we've got Robert again. Scott loves TKGM.
He knows me all too well.
I think Scott's a TKGM guy. Vivek is here. Cool. Vivek, thank you so much for always coming and supporting us here. 20-hour fast. It's not enough. Well, that's good. You went over 18. Me and Marino are like weird intermittent fasting workout people. Okay.
I've done about a 20-minute fast today. That's probably the most I've
That doesn't
gotten.
count. It's not long enough. Okay. All right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah.
Go ahead. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah,
We
in
got 10
general,
people in here. They want to learn stuff.
Right. The general idea, I think, is we're just going to kind of hack around and see, how we customize Tanzu and like some of the stuff, especially around networking that we've been doing. And to go to the point that Jay had mentioned, about pausing reconciliation of apps and all of that, that actually came in use here for this demo, basically, where I created a cluster that the new integration that happens between Antrea and NSX-T actually requires a higher version of Antrea than comes in the current released version of Tanzu.
Okay.
So I actually paused the reconciliation of Antrea and then installed the upstream version of 1.3 of Antrea into this cluster. So if we did a QCP on that, I was going to say here, and just took a look, one of the cool things we actually deployed here, the interworking operator is how this works. So it's basically a controller that runs within your cluster that you deploy after having Antrea, that registers it against Tanzu, or registers it against NSX. And then once it's registered, it actually becomes really cool, because if I go to the inventory now of just my standard NSX, within the containers, I get all my namespaces. I could see any pods that exist here, and all their labels actually
what is
bubble up
so
together
what
as
is
well.
why is it called interworking?
So it's the interworking between Antrea and NSX.
Oh, okay.
Why? You know,
We don't know. Someone else came
as
up
we
with the
know,
name.
as we know, naming is the hardest part about any project in the world.
Yeah.
But in general, the really cool thing here is that we get all of our pods and all of our data and services, pods, everything come up into NSX here. And then from this point, we can actually fully manage our clusters. So I only have one connected right now. But if I went just, for example, into like the Yelp namespace, we can see right now I don't have any network policies or any pods here. But if I just came back to here and did a kubectl, let's say apply -f to the Yelp folder, and whatever, just deploy a simple application here, got 4 standard network policies and then deployments and services.
What's
the really
Yelp?
cool
Is that
thing-
something you made up?
No, Yelp is just a nice demo application for Kubernetes.
Okay.
And if I just did a get services here.
Oh, it's like a play on Yelp. You're making fun of
Exactly.
Yelp. Okay.
Exactly. And if I took this just now and actually came and opened up the service type load balancer, if the app is up yet, it's just a little tiny app that you can kind of play around with and like vote for different things. I guess the app isn't up yet. But in general, what's cool is that I get all my pods now automatically and I can see their status and I could go and see everything, but I also get network policies now. And we can actually view, for example, standard Kubernetes network policies from here. It's only view only though right now.
Okay.
But what is really strong is actually that we can go here, and in NSX, we have this idea of a distributed firewall. And a distributed firewall is basically, we use it for whatever we need. We can, create different firewall rules. So for like proxy networks or default layer 3. And so one of the cool things that till now, it's only been distributed firewall. But if I had a new policy, I can actually attach through the UI here. So you could have the security admins of an organization attach it to a cluster. And then from this point, they can actually go and create rules.
One second, I got it. Robert's making a pet store joke. So Robert, I'll tell you something. You know, the original K8's pet store app in Kubernetes, I was the one that wrote that. And it was because I think Pet Clinic is the best demo app ever. And I don't think so. And then we made a synthetic data generator called the Big Pet Store Data Generator, and it used Markov models to simulate pet store transactions where people would walk within. So me and RJ Nowling did that. He's now a professor,
really,
over somewhere in like the Great Lakes where it's like -10 degrees. So if you ever want to talk about like synthetic pet store demos, just like let me know, Robert. Anyways, sorry, keep going. I can't possibly be more blessed on Christmas than the fact that Robert talked about fake pets.
Oh yeah.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, no. So what's really cool here though, is, we've got this idea now that within NSX, I can actually go and create my own firewall rules, just like I could for any of my virtual machines. So you can create groups here. If I just called this test, for example, and I could set up all this, criteria of how something comes in. So I could say the namespace name is Yelp, let's say, and also that the pod tag, which would be just the name in NSX for a label though. And I could say, let's say front end, right? So we have the Kubernetes tier is front end. And now any pod that has this label, because they automatically come up to NSX, will now show up here. So now this test group, I could create all of my groups. I could create any of my, firewall policies based off of these different groups. So we can see here Yelp front end. I can do the same thing with back end and then apply all of my policies, whether I wanted to do it from here or if I wanted to do it from, a different place, if I wanted to do it from network policies, but I can manage it. And this actually creates Antrea cluster network policies. So if I came here and did a kubectl get cluster network policies, CRD Antrea IO, we can actually see that this was created through NSX, and we actually get a network policy in Kubernetes to manage all of our applications.
I didn't know that. I
yeah,
didn't know
this
you
is
could do
brand
all
new.
CNPs through NSX.
Oh yeah, this is brand new. So
This is new stuff. Cool.
Exactly. So if I did like the cluster network policies and actually showed this one, what we'll see is they're actually using Antrea groups in the applied to and from where.
Yeah.
So if I did a kubectl get, what are they called? I think cluster groups. All right. Yeah. Cluster groups.crd Antrea IO, and went and looked at this one. What we can actually see is that we get everything that I defined within the UI there, just through groups and whatever, actually gets automatically tied in here. And basically, we can both manage them locally in Kubernetes as well as manage from NSX-T, which gives us all these really strong capabilities now. And I linked in the docs the official documentation from VMware for how to install this. But I don't like manual tasks, so I actually automated the process. So at cluster creation, it actually will run some API calls against NSX to register itself.
Why don't you like manual tasks?
I like everything being automated. It's more fun that way. Right?
I just like to do, sometimes I just like to not automate stuff.
Exactly. But if we look here, right, like this was just pushed up today. And basically, if you just add the 4 YAML files from here into the Tanzu directory, and you just need to run this script before, which registers against NSX, and it will print out the additional values that you need to add to your TKG config file with all of the different values. So the NSX
you've got a shell
manager,
script that automates all the environment variables we need to plug into TKG in order to get this automation for free.
So basically, it requires to use a certificate-based principal identity to talk to NSX. So what we do here, basically, we just generate with OpenSSL some certificates, and then run an API call against NSX to create a principal identity, and then base64 encode them out and just print out basically, hey, just add this to your cluster config, deploy it, and this will deploy upstream Antrea 1.3, and then we'll install the interworking controller automatically into your environment for you as well.
Damn.
So yeah, out of the box, you can get it. You just have to run this script before, and then it automatically connects up to NSX, which is actually a really cool thing to do. And yeah, so I just generated this today. I've created about 7 clusters this way, and it works well. And no, Ariel, I do not use Microsoft Word as an IDE. I am not a crazy person on YouTube. Hopefully, I am on YouTube, but...
So Robert says that he's basically saying the same thing that I'm saying, which is that like he winds up copying and pasting the whole same thing 1,000 times, and he's too lazy to ever automate it.
Exactly.
And then there's one final thing you forgot, Robert, which is when you write the Confluence page of Doom that copies and pastes the code that you should have just automated into a Confluence doc for other people to run.
Yeah.
Ariel, do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
All right, go ahead. Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no. So I think like this Antrea NSX is actually a really cool integration. I think it shows, you know, a real change in the CNI world where we'll be able to get really true good integration between our legacy apps and what exists in the container world. And bringing the two together here is actually a really nice capability. Where they also added the last piece of the integration is actually that we can run trace flows with Antrea directly through the UI. So instead of using like AntCuddle or anything like that, I could actually run some like TCP here on 4567, which is the port of this, Select your cluster, right? So this is connected to all of your clusters that are running Antrea. And you can now go and say, okay, I want to do this from the Yelp namespace, let's say UI, to the app server, and I can trace this right now. And this is going to tell me exactly if it passed or not. And if I actually go and edit this and change this to port, let's say 443, which shouldn't be open. I guess it is. But it does work. My network policies, I deleted the network policies. But we can basically just go and completely mess around here and set up different network policies and then run the trace flows from here and see on which network policy it's falling through a very simple UI in the same place that you would do it for any of your virtual machines.
So I think it's easier than what we normally. Wow.
Exactly. Wow. It's so much easier because it's also connected to all of your clusters, right? So now I only have one, but you get a drop-down list and just select the cluster that you want to test.
This is
and because you get the drop-downs, right? So like the Octant plugin that exists as well,
Antonin
have to fill in
one
everything.
Second. So yeah, Antonin's saying looking forward to cross-cluster trace flows from the NSX UI.
Yeah, that would be awesome to see. That would be really cool, especially with the Antrea integration with NSX for routable pods in Tanzu. Adding that together with this to get the routable pods and then the connection between clusters could be really fun to see the traffic flow. But like the nice thing here, again, because of the way that NSX is working versus like the Octant plugin, is that we actually get the drop-down lists here, right? Like in the Octant plugin, you actually have to go and manually put in the pod name, which is, the beginning part is always easy. It's just the two UUIDs at the end that are always a mess. And here we just get the full drop-down list, and you could do like by node because it has all this data, and then no matter which namespace. So it just becomes really easy to play around with here and actually just get our trace flows. So I think this is a really cool idea that they have this year. That, you know, I'm excited to see how this is going to move forward.
This fills in a big need, like, of people not knowing how to make, like, there's always been UIs for making NSX firewall rules, and they're reasonably intuitive, right? And then there's this problem of like, okay, well now I'm doing everything in Kubernetes, and like I'm like, how do I? People have wanted a user interface for network policies in Kubernetes for a while.
Right. So, and they exist out there, right? There are a few out there. Things like, you know, Calico Enterprise has its own UI.
Thanks for coming, Ariel. Thanks for hanging out.
Right.
Late for y'all. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like Calico Enterprise exists out there. There are some stuff. But I think that in the end, you know, the really nice thing here is that it's integrating into a system that already exists in a lot of enterprises. Like Calico Enterprise is a great UI, but it works for its applications. It works for Calico. It's its own ecosystem. Versus here, we're really integrating with a whole separate stack, but getting a unified single pane of glass kind of.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But anyways, I thought that was just kind of cool to show. But you know, in general, this repo,
and you're CNI inclusive. You've got everything in here. You've got Antrea, you've got Cilium, you've got stuff,
and I've got some
and you've
Calico.
got some secret Calico stuff going on with the Tizera operator.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah,
bored of those like sort of second-rate packages that we originally you made your own.
The Antrea package is very good.
Carvel packages. How did that? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so in general, once the packaging APIs came out for Carvel, I was actually just really interested in them and decided I would start playing around. And one of the things that was getting difficult as a system integrator was when you come to a customer, they're new to Kubernetes, everyone's heard of Helm, and now all of the installations that happen. You say, great, for the Tanzu packages, you've got to use the Tanzu package install, and we're using Carvel, but then go ahead and install, let's say, Cube apps, and there you're going to use Helm charts. Or it's just all these different packaging mechanisms, and it was starting to confuse a lot of people. And when I looked into the packaging APIs of Carvel, one of the things I saw is that there's actually support for Helm. So I took just a little side project and I built a tool actually that I linked here, which is a Helm to Carvel conversion tool. That basically you can give it any Helm repository, and it will convert them into Carvel packages, including air gap support. Because one of the things that Carvel is really strong with is that it can do full air gapping. It can pull down all of the images.
You're saying like when I've got customers running Min.io and I'm like, what? And you're running it from a Helm 3, I can just like make a Carvel package out of it.
Exactly. So if I like took a look here, this is just like a command, right? If I run Helm to package, which is the, alias for this, program, and then gave it a repo name and the repo URL that I want to pull from. And I told it, yeah, the number of chart versions, I want to get the last 2 chart versions.
Can you explain to people why you do this? I know why you do it.
Yeah.
I want you to tell people why you do this.
Yeah. So in general, what I wanted to do is build a consistent user experience. So if we look at Tanzu, right? So Tanzu cluster list, let's say. And I looked and I get my clusters here. And the way that Tanzu works is we also have this idea of packages that come from Tanzu. So we have Tanzu package. Sorry, let's do a source. To Tanzu completion bash. Just
You don't have to do a $sign before that. I didn't even know that worked.
Yeah, you can do it like this. If you just do the arrow pointing towards the source. And then if we did a Tanzu package, let's say available list right now, one of the things that we'll be able to see is that in this cluster, I've got all of these different, packages that are available to me. So some of these come out of the box from VMware, and some of them are custom.
Yeah.
But if we look, we've got like Pinniped and Metric Server, which all come from Tanzu. And then we've also got the things that we can install, like Multis CNI and Prometheus, and there's Grafana here, and FluentBit and external DNS. But one of the things that I wanted to do is actually add additional packages. So what if I could take any application, any Helm chart, and install it the same way? Because someone can actually do Tanzu.
You want to give people a Tanzu native way to manage their packages, even if the packages don't ship with framework or TCE.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if I did a Tanzu package installed list, I can see anything that's installed right now.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I can do if I just change over to my other cluster.
I'm trying to convince Matt to move over to Tanzu. So can you see this over here? So here's a nice reason to move to Tanzu. You've got a package manager that's an upstream package manager that's like an actual Linuxy type of package manager.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
here, just this one command that I'm running right now, right? So what this is going to do is this is actually taking the Bitnami Helm charts. I gave it a list of charts because I don't want the whole thing, just because this is a demo. But if you don't pass in a chart list file path, it's just the entire Helm repository. And what this is actually doing is it's pulling from charts Bitnami the last 2 versions of the 3 charts that I mentioned in there. And this is actually going to push up to my registry right now packages that it's generating in the back end from these Helm charts. And these are fully air gapped. So when it pulls up, it's going to pull in, we'll see in a second, we can see it's actually using kbuild in the back end from Carvel as well to basically come and understand all the image references and make them out into SHAs. But once I go and copy this image package, which is the package repository, to any image registry in the world, it will actually import all of the container images as well as all the manifests in a single repository and change all of the references for me at deployment time to point to my local registry. So this becomes really a strong capability. And we can see this is just pulling down everything right now. We've already done Apache. It's doing cubeapps now. And the nice thing with cubeapps is it's actually got 2 different levels of nested Helm charts. And this tool goes through all of the nested charts as well and pulls them all in.
So now you have all these packages native on your cluster.
Exactly.
And then you can uninstall and install those packages just like you would like a Linux package, right? So that's kind of how he takes the Tanzu stuff and like makes it like native to his own. And I mean, it's like one of the cool things about Tanzu that I don't know if there's any other tool that allows you to do that kind of thing. And I'm not trying to be like
I have yet to meet one that does, right? So now basically in the output from the command, it just finished in 2 minutes.
Yeah, go try G-Cloud. Go try to do that with G-Cloud right now. It's not gonna
and if I run this output command of Tanzu package repository add, it just added the repository. And if I were to do now,
I'm going to interrupt you in a second, just warning you.
Oh yeah, no problems. I look for package repository, so we can see it's not reconciled yet. It'll take a few minutes just to reconcile, just like adding an apt repository. But once this reconciles into my cluster, what I'll be able to do is actually all of these images are actually always suffixed with a, kind of like a fully qualified domain name.
Yeah.
And the fully qualified domain name here I created was Antrea Live. So we'll be able to
that is so sweet of you.
Antrea.live.
That makes me feel so much Christmas joy.
Exactly. So we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Exactly.
So Robert has a question about packaging.
Yeah.
So this is maybe one of the coolest shows we've done in terms of the breadth of how people can use this stuff even outside of the Antrea ecosystem. So his question is Carvel package registries.
So managing them is actually not that difficult. It's actually really easy. In the end, it can be as easy or as complex as you want it to be. If it's just converting over Helm charts and then hosting them locally, it's as easy as running this tool and just pushing it into your registry and you're good. If you want to write your own custom automation, so you want to do things like YTT and KBuild and all of that, once you have those manifests, it's a matter of a few seconds and you can make that into a package repository. So it's really easy once you decide what you want to build. But if you have the base templates, whether that be YTT or Helm charts, it's a really easy process. And I'm actually in the middle of writing some documentation on that. That'll make it much easier even, to add into my repository.
So right now, because when TCE deploys by default, it gives you a default Carvel package repository.
Right.
And that comes from Tanzu framework. So then so you've got that default Tanzu package repository. So like when you want to add stuff from another repository, what's your workflow there?
So in general, once you have the package repository, all you need to run is this command. You run a Tanzu package repository add, you give it a name, you tell it. So a repository in the end is an OCI bundle or basically a bundle that's located within a container registry. You give it the URL to that specific package repository and tell it in which namespaces package repository is supposed to be created. That's all you need to do. And that's why it's so simple, right? So now we have the Bitnami OSS finished, right? So if I did now let's say Tanzu package available list, and let's see what I have here now available to me. So we can see I've got Apache.Antrea Live. I've got now Cube Apps Antrea Live and WordPress Antrea Live.
I just love the name of your repository you made.
Oh yeah. And if I did here, the really cool thing here as well is like if I did a Tanzu package, let's say available list for WordPress, we can actually see now that I've got two versions of it. I've got 12.2.6 and 12.2.7, which are actually mapped to the versions of the Helm chart itself. And if I went through the Tanzu command and did a get to this / the version and said, hey, give me the schema of what values I could pass into this. Because in Helm, I've got a values file. How can I know what values to pass in? So if I run this command here with the value schema, I actually get a table with all of the values.
Carvel values from the Helm values? How did you do that, Scott Rosenberg?
I converted the Helm values into an
wizard.
open API v3
A
schema.
wizard from Israel.
And I actually took all the descriptions from the fields within the packages,
Oh my God, this is-
have the defaults, the types, everything is set out here. So you can actually take any
Oh my
Helm
God.
chart and convert it here into a package with full documentation.
This is it's Christmas magic.
Through it. And this works with any Helm repository. So
I
it's
believe in
really
Santa.
fun.
I'm a believer.
But yeah, no, and I think it's a really cool, it's just like a little side project that I built together. We released it open source here at TerraSky. And it's a really fun project just to mess around with. Because
somebody go to TerraSky-OSS Helm to Carvel conversion tool and put a star on that project.
Exactly. So it originally had been here within my own repository, and then I released it under the company. And the old version that was here is how I got, whatever. There were a bunch of stars because of this, and then I just decided that it deserved to be on its own. So I separated it out from the repo. But yeah.
It's great to see that y'all over at TerraSky are putting stuff up on GitHub and making stuff public for folks to play with. That's great. Yeah,
we're just starting also, so there's going to be a lot more coming soon.
Cool.
But yeah, so that's like really Carvel packages, right? But the other cool thing when it comes to Carvel packages is they're used in Tanzu. And sometimes they aren't necessarily exactly what we need, right? Sometimes we may need some more knobs than are exposed to us and things like that. And using Carvel, we can actually also extend that using like overlays. So I also have within this repo, this TKG extension modifications, where just as an example here, Prometheus that comes in Tanzu doesn't have Thanos within it. And that's great for a lot of environments, but we had a specific use case by a customer that wanted to ship all their Prometheuses to Thanos for long-term storage, and then from there up to Grafana. So basically what we did is created just a simple overlay file to add Thanos into the package from Prometheus. And then we just wrote a simple install script that installs the package, and then it just annotates that package with the secret that the overlay is in. And then it will automatically reconcile that package and add the Thanos sidecar. Right. So it's small things like that, or even like in the extensions, Harbor that comes in Tanzu doesn't come with Chart Museum. Okay. So we added that here also with an overlay. Or in Grafana, we added service type load balancer support, which now works in 1.4, but didn't in 1.3, and LDAP support.
So do you use that pause trick to swap the packages out?
So no, we're using overlays. So we're actually just attaching an overlay onto the package.
But you don't have a problem of I guess you don't, because it's all.
Exactly, as long as the package install is annotated.
So when you really want to swap something out that you can't overlay.
Right. So a good example of that is actually Cap Controller. Yeah. Because Cap Controller is really growing a lot. It's growing very fast, and it's very hard for downstream projects to always stay up to date with these things. And one of the difficult things is like certain projects within VMware. So like,
so for folks who don't know, Cap Controller is basically a canned operator, right? Like it allows you to basically build an operator for anything that does most of the things that an operator might do, or a lot of the things that an operator would do, without you having to write anything.
Exactly. Right. It's awesome. That's how all the packages are working.
We've gone through it on the show before, but there's always new people coming in. That's why.
That was a great session with Dimitri that you did. Yeah. But so like, if we look at like the general idea, Cap Controller is actually reconciled from the management cluster into all workload clusters. And like Tanzu RabbitMQ came out with a new version 1.2, which has some awesome new features. But its installation requires to use Cap Controller 0.28 or above, and TKG 1.4 comes with 0.23. So basically what you can do in that case is if you go to your management cluster, and if you look here in kubectl get app in the namespace of your cluster, you can see that you actually get one which is the name of the cluster minus cap controller. And if I actually went and took this cluster, let's say, and edited this app, one of the things I can do on any app CR is just under spec, I can just add paused true. And once I've added that value there, once I've done that, now cap controller will not try and reconcile my application anymore. And now what I could do is if I go into that cluster, if I did a kubectx back to Antrea live CLS02, I could just do get minus n TKG system, and I can just go and delete deployment minus n TKG system cap controller, and cap is deleted. And if I went to hold on.
Now nothing's going to replace it. I love
exactly.
That
right? So nothing is going to actually go and replace this anymore. And now I could go and deploy my own cap controller. I could deploy cap controller through the open source and deploy whatever version I needed. So this is a really strong capability.
Who's Yadi? Where are you coming from? I haven't seen you in the stream so far. Did you just join? And what is Vun.rent? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Right. But yeah, so this is like a really cool capability that we have when we're dealing with like Antrea, right? And, some of the other really cool things just to like, mess around with here. If we went into the TKGM customizations that I just pulled down, if I go into TKG customizations, this was something I was showing Jay a few weeks ago, was some of this stuff in the custom YTT overlays that I've been building. Because really when we talk about how to, modify Tanzu, right, or any of these extension points, we can add our own package repositories, we can, pause applications. But one of the things that we've experienced from a lot of our customers, they say, when I deploy a cluster, on one hand, I want to give self-service to my end user, right? I want the developer to be able to say, hey, give me a cluster. But when a cluster gets deployed, we want it to have certain things already installed in it. We want to make sure that it has Prometheus and Grafana. We want to make sure that by just installing the cluster, maybe I get the Tanzu Postgres operator installed automatically, or Tanzu build service, or Tanzu application platform, right? So one of the things that I added into here is actually this installation directory. And these are just some YTT files that if we look at the README, it'll be easier to see here. But if we actually looked at like any of these things, let's say, if we look at this, basically all you need to do is copy these files into, this folder. I should update that to .config/Tanzu to the new path. But basically, once you put it into this path, all of these YAML files.
Yeah, this is like 1.3 or whatever, or 1.2.
Yeah. This works on 1.4. I just haven't updated the README from 1.3.
You just have to switch the .config. Yeah.
Exactly. And if we look here, we've added all these new data values now to Tanzu. So enable Tanzu software auto install. Do we want it to install Cert Manager, Contour, external DNS, Prometheus, Grafana, FluentBit, Tanzu build service, Tanzu Postgres, Tanzu Rabbit, Tanzu MySQL, and Valero? It can install and configure all of this automatically for me.
So Robert had a question. So Robert,
yeah,
he uses that paused annotation, and that paused annotation prevents reconciliation of that local cap instance.
Exactly.
And so that local cap instance, even though Tanzu management cluster isn't going to say like, that the desired state of the workload cluster is different, that local cap instance is not going to implement that because it's going to see that and it's going to pause it. I think that's how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So when it takes a look there, it's going to see that it's paused and it's just not going to run the reconciliation against it. So we put the actual pause in the management cluster. So In the management cluster,
Oh,
there's
other
an
way around. So
application.
that's sorry. Yeah, it's not that the local one is skipping it; it's that the management cluster is skipping it.
Exactly. So if I go back there just to show this again, if I go back there and did a kget app, and it was Antrea live CLS02, and actually instead of get, let's
So
just
that
make
paused.
it. Oh,
So does that? But
Exporter.
does that mean then? So does that mean that there's another possible hack you can do where you could actually disable the local cap?
yes, this is what that did.
Yeah. Wait.
This disabled cap in a workload cluster. So one of the cool things that people don't know about an app CR, and this is a really strong capability, is that the app CR is not just local within a cluster. And if you have a secret with a kube config in it for another cluster, you can just add in the spec this cluster kube config secret ref and just give it that kube config, and it will reconcile this application from the management cluster in the workload cluster.
Yeah.
You don't need cap
That's how.
controller
That's. I mean, that's the
installed there.
backbone of framework, right? Yeah.
Exactly. You don't need cap controller in the workload cluster to manage applications on it from a single location.
But
So
we do put cap controller in the workloads.
you put it there so that then you can manage from within the cluster Antrea, CSI, CNI, CPI,
Yeah.
AKO, all of that stuff, right? But you technically, anyone that wanted to use this in TCE, let's say, or wanted to use this in their own distribution, could install cap controller in like a single management cluster and actually manage all their workload clusters with cap, right?
Yeah,
That's a capability that cap gives us.
Yeah, you could get
So
rid of
here
the
it's pointing to that kube config,
Yeah.
right? And here we added this paused true. So what this is saying is that the app in the management cluster that's actually deploying cap controller in the workload cluster should not reconcile, is how this is working basically.
But that app, remind me, when we make that app, we make one of those app instances per workload, and it's in a workload namespace, right?
Exactly. You create one per cluster of
So
the cap controller.
swap this out when you make the cluster. How do you automate?
It's a per cluster basis. So it's basically per cluster. You can run a kubectl patch instead of an edit.
So if you want to do this, the way you automate it is you kubectl patch every time you make a cluster?
Basically, that's, you could also just, because the app is created through, there's no way of disabling the app, I think. I don't think there's a knob to disable that. I think that's part of add-ons.
Yeah, it's going to be created either way. So you need to like patch, and you can't
exactly. What you would do, it could be done with a job. You could create a cluster resource set that would run a job that would just patch it for you automatically.
That would patch it as soon as it, yeah.
Yeah.
But you couldn't YTT that. You couldn't have the cluster be born paused.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. That's actually interesting. I'll take a look. Basically, in order to do that, the question would be if in .config Tanzu TKG, and let's see if we went into providers and then YTT and went into here, and then it would be under, where would cap controller be? I think under add-ons. Yeah. And then CD into cap controller here. And then if we did a bat to add cap controller. So you're doing a cluster resource set here. So it actually may be possible. I'd have to look into this a bit deeper, but it could actually be possible if the manifests are actually here and not a part of the backend code, but are actually part of like the cap controller overlay.
Well, we do put the cluster resource sets in tree, right? So it's like.
Yeah, but it's not, the cluster resource sets aren't really used for cap controller anymore. They're used for other things, right? Yeah, if I did a kget cluster resource set, let's see. If I did a cluster, I have to actually change kubectx into the management cluster to do this. And then did a kget cluster resource set. and took a look here. So you can see, like, for each cluster, we actually don't have one for the cap, because cap just gets deployed automatically.
So we do that in the Golang code.
Exactly. But the manifest, I believe, would exist actually here, though. Actually, it should be in 0.2 add-ons. And if I did 0.2 into cap controller, and if we looked here in cat to add cap controller.
You spelled cat wrong.
Yeah. So let's see. So here we're creating a secret. No, so this is the old method of a cluster resource set. If I looked at the cap controller lib, add-on data lib, what are you doing here? Here are your the data values. No, so it's not there either. And if we looked at the overlay lib, here you're overlaying on a deployment of type cap controller. So yeah, it should actually be possible in this file.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Here on the cap control. No, this is the deployment of cap controller itself.
But that would be where you would be able to change that.
No, that's the deployment of cap controller in the workload cluster, not the cap controller app that gets created in the management cluster. You also have the app itself, right?
For folks wondering, do we need to give people a quick visual aid of this?
Yeah, we can.
Should we draw it? Let me share for a second and just so I could show people what we're talking about, because let me see here. I think we've gone through this before. Yeah. Then I'm going to give it back to you. All right. So meanwhile, you can hack around and see if this even works.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find this.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'll share just for a second. Okay. So, and we did this in the Dimitri show, as you mentioned, right? But
right.
So in general, what Scott's going back and forth and looking at the way things work right now is that you have a management cluster. And why is Myro like spamming me on Christmas? Why can't it just can't you take a break for Christmas, Myro? So this is green. We can do like Christmas colors. So normally the cap controller on the management cluster then reconciles the cap instances on the workload cluster. So Scott already talked about that. And then like what Scott's looking at right now is the idea of like, is there a way that this itself, since this is actually created using a cluster resource set, right?
Exactly.
Now, when I make a workload cluster, is that also created by a cluster resource set?
When you create a what?
When I create, is cap also put in via CRS on the workload cluster, or is it put in through cap? Does cap put cap on the workload cluster, or does the CRS put cap on the workload?
No, it's put in through Tanzu add-ons manager.
So it's our add-ons manager that does that. So in other words, it's our management.
Well, so Tanzu add-ons manager, if I'm reading the stuff here correctly, Tanzu add-ons manager is creating the app CR in the management cluster that's targeting the workload cluster that deploys cap. So cap is deployed by cap, but that initial app, I believe, is being created by
Tanzu management. When you say I want to make a new cluster, Tanzu add-ons manager says, okay, I'm going to, in your new cluster, sort of set the baseline for what that workload cluster needs to have in it.
Exactly. And the way that it installs cap controller for that to work is by creating an app CR in the management cluster that deploys cap controller in the workload cluster using host network. because it actually deploys the CNI. So it has to come up before Antrea or Calico do.
Yep.
So it does not
Cap
look
runs
like it's
on the host
possible.
network for folks that don't know. And that's actually an optimization more than a requirement. Well, I mean, it's a requirement, but like, you know, like there's workarounds, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we're
for
gonna
sure.
like possibly move. Like, we're not 100% sure where we're gonna go with this, but like, well, right now the way it works is that cap controllers. I mean, it's okay to do cap controller on the host port. That makes sense. But then the tricky thing is that there's a weird thing we do that's an optimization, which is that we install the CNI as a CRS and then we adopt it into cap. And that's
Exactly.
the optimization that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, so it's a pretty, complex idea, but it works really well. It's actually really fun.
Of course it works.
Yeah,
We're
here,
at
so
that
let's-
hour mark, and like we've still got 5 minutes left. So if there's anything else you want to show us, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think just the other two other kind of cool things that are kind of in this sphere is one of them is actually and I like to bring this up because obviously kubectl is the best part of Kubernetes. There's no need for a next gen tool there.
Why would you ever want to rebuild it?
Exactly. But so in basically what we have here is we actually had kubectl by default is using IP tables, and the kubectl with IP tables has some performance limitations, let's say. And we had a customer that had very large scale that wanted to run kubectl in ipvs mode. And cluster API actually doesn't enable that. It's not that Tanzu doesn't, it's that cluster API doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what we built here is a hack that actually enables IPVS as well. So a customer can just add enable IPVS on their cluster, and they get IPVS mode instead of IP tables. And the way that works is pretty ugly, but we basically run an overlay here on the kubeadm config templates and add in the different mod prob commands in order to, just enable everything that's needed for IPVS, because the default templates don't have that.
So, I filed an issue about this in TCE the other day, and I didn't know that you had done this.
Yep.
Hey, check
so
this
here
out.
it is.
Look
So
at
here
this.
it is.
You did
So we're doing this overlay append here, also on the kubeadm control plane. And then what we do is we create a file. And this file is actually, we just call it temp generate kubeproxy.sh. And these commands are run in a section called pre-kubeadm commands. So all of the files for running kubeadm are on the cluster, but before it runs the kubeadm init or kubeadm join, it runs these commands.
Yeah.
So what we have it do is run this script that we're actually creating as part of the cloud init spec. And what this is doing is it's going over all the files in the temp directory, which is where the files get placed by the kubeadm control plane or kubeadm config template. And we basically find the kubeadm config file that was generated for us by Cluster API. And we read that file and add to the end of it another YAML document of kubeproxy configuration mode IPVS. And by doing this, automatically when kubeadm is initiated by the cloud init script of Cluster API, IPVS mode is selected because we've actually just manipulated the file before it's executed.
Yeah.
And so we get full IPVS. So I did this, and the reason that I've also done this is if we look here at the cluster config changes, I've also added support for Cilium. So you can install Cilium on Tanzu. So just install Cilium and install Cilium CLI. The Cilium CLI works also with these pre-kubeadm commands and just pulls down the Cilium CLI. It checks the SHAs and then moves it to USR local bin, so that if you needed to debug Cilium, for example, I did the same thing for Calico. To debug Calico or to debug Cilium, you need the special CLI really. And so sometimes when you have networking issues, and that's why you're going to debug, it's kind of hard to download the binary when you're dealing with a host that has networking issues. So I just install it automatically on every node when it comes up. And then anytime you just SSH into that node or open up a console to that VM, you can just run the Cilium command automatically. And this just installs it onto all the nodes if you decided to install Cilium. And with Calico, we also did this for installing so that we could do like BGP support and Taifa and some of the cool things.
Can you paste that link? I want to make sure we get that link. This is really cool.
So all of these links are actually in the Antrea notes. They're all here in the notes.
Marino is going to do a show with us one of these days, and he's leaving. Thank you for coming,
Awesome.
Marino. Vivek, KubeADM config file and temp created. Won't it be after pre-8? So Vivek has an interesting question.
So the command is
diagram here.
So the sequencing is that those files get created by Cloud Init, right? So if we actually take a look here, if I bring up the environment. So basically the way that it works is, let's see, kubectl.
I did not know you could change the kube proxy mode. And I filed an issue in Cluster API. I filed an issue in Cluster API to propagate the I jumped on this skip phases issue, and I'm looking at it right now. And then I filed an issue in TCE about how we needed guidelines on running without a kube proxy, so I could run my own in there.
Yeah. So if I went here and did a Tanzu cluster,
okay.
Antrea live CLS02. So let's say that I wanted to take a look at what exists in this cluster and just do show all conditions all. Awesome. So now, what is it? Show group members. That's what I forgot to do. Awesome. So once I have this, this is basically just a nice view within Tanzu CLI that comes from Cluster Cuddle that gives me the status of my all of the objects, right? So we have our cluster, and then we have the KubeADM control plane, and the machines that are under that, and then the same thing goes for workers, right? And we get all this stuff. That's all cool. Now, when it comes to the bootstrapping, we actually have a few other CRs. So if I ran this just with show details, we can actually see the bootstrap configs, right? And these bootstrap configs, the KubeADM bootstrap provider, generates basically a cloud init secret for each node before it gets created. And the way that the cloud init is built out, we can actually take a look at it. And if I did a kubectl get secret, and let's see here, Antrea.
Yep, and that gets pulled down. And then there's.
And if I looked here, right, if we wanted to look at just what this looks like, right, just as the example, and I said, hey, control plane, right? I want to look at the control plane node.
Yeah, so each cluster API provider, for folks that don't know this, like in general, the idea is your cluster API provider has to like have some way of telling a VM what to do when it boots up.
Right. So there you go.
Yeah. And that's
this is the cloud init script, right? So everyone that's using the KubeADM control plane provider today, I mean, there's work going on upstream to support Ignition as well in the KubeADM provider. Yeah. But currently it's just cloud init, right? So what happens? We get this cloud config. And basically what happens is it adds all these write file commands that get run for us. And, you know, this is where we're creating the qubit manifest and all the certificates are being passed in. We're also creating that KubeADM YAML file and all the files that we really need, right? And we have that init configuration. And what happens automatically after those files are created in the system, nothing has been run, we then get this run CMD. And this run CMD that's happening here is everything in the pre-KubeADM commands will be run before KubeADM init. So KubeADM init will be the last command to run before, after the
Before you
pre-cube
hot
commands.
swap all those configurations out. Yeah.
There's also the ability, there's post-cube commands, and those will, by the Bootstrap provider, those get added after the cube init command.
Yeah.
So it orders them accordingly. So the files are created and then it runs the commands. So that's basically the ordering that happens here automatically for us.
Yeah, we do the post kubeadm boot for the Windows CNI stuff, but like, yeah.
Exactly, because you need, after the cluster is up, after you have kubelet up and running, then you have to kind of register it back to the cluster.
Yeah, that means, so it's nice because you can really customize it before or after, and then the files. So like we use that a lot in framework, right? Like we do that when there's OS specific stuff you need to do to make networking work properly. We do all that in the before, and in the after is when you do. So your kube proxy you do after, right? You can do the kube proxy stuff after, right?
I do it before because I'd rather have it come up with ipvs and not need to have it reconfigured.
Okay.
So I run that in pre-kubeadm. Right.
So
and so
here, swap the file out after and it would work because
you could.
It's a host pod.
Exactly.
Host manifest, so it'll just automatically reload. Yeah.
Exactly. But so here what we're doing is, right, like, so just as an example of like what does exist out of the box is actually this adding into the etc hosts, adding in the host name that was received to 127.0.0.1. And the reason this is so important is there was actually an issue upstream in Cluster API that someone said that their nodes were coming back up after they were shut down, and he powered them back on. And they were coming back up without an IP address, without an external IP. The nodes were working, but the external IP wasn't returning.
Yeah.
And when we debugged the issue, what it seems to be is that it was basically trying to run health checks against the node name, because that's the way that Kubernetes is running. And kubelet was running against its own node name, but because his manifest didn't have adding into etc hosts the host name and local host, it wasn't able to reach itself because that name doesn't exist in the DNS, and it was failing.
So the internal IP was fine, but the external IP was wrong?
So no, exactly. There was no external IP. Then there was no IP returned back from the CPI on the node.
Oh.
Because it wasn't able to get it.
Does that only break load balance, like external load balancers, or does that break other stuff?
It breaks a lot of stuff.
I mean, when it registers with the API server, it's sending its IP.
It's fine. It's fine. It's registered and everything is fine. But in order to get that internal or external, it can break a lot of integrations that happen on top of Kubernetes. The node works.
Anything that's looking to that external IP field, yeah.
Exactly. Or internal IP.
Break the kube proxy.
Exactly. Right. So like that's just like another example of these cases where, we really can automate most of these fixes because Cluster API is so pluggable, and TKGM specifically happens to be the only distribution that exists from any vendor out there that's a supported Cluster API distribution that gives you full access to the raw Cluster API manifests. So in other products from VMware and from other providers as well, we just don't have those capabilities that we really do here. And it's pretty awesome to see that we can enable ipvs and that we can switch out our CNIs, whether it's to just test things out of the Antrea and NSX-T, or we can do things like Calico and Taifa and install, an up-to-date version of Calico J. It's always fun.
You like this. Okay. So you like this TKGM, get in there and like break stuff.
It's really fun because you can do whatever you need, right? Like, so the most crazy YTT overlay that people can try and grok and understand, it took me a while to build, was how to enable multiple machine deployments on a cluster, in an easy way, out of the box from day zero. Because we have the new capability of node pools in 1.4. Yeah. But that's a day 2 action. And it's 1 by 1, and it's a manual task, and it's a bit.
It's not fully baked in yet. It's kind of more of a veneer over the machine deployment.
Exactly. And so what we did here is we added this other vSphere overlay. And what we do here is we basically do a bunch of loops through YTT. And so we allow every value of a virtual machine spec. So everything, if we looked at the default values here, right, we've got vSphere worker num CPUs and disk gib and memory megabytes and data center and data store. And all these things are possible for all of our single machine deployment. But what if I want that different for each machine deployment?
Yeah.
So what we did is created a default values file with actually up to 15. So we can support up to 15 additional machine deployments.
Merry
and
Christmas,
just add it.
Vivek. We'll come back. We'll do a show in January.
Yeah.
We miss you.
Exactly.
All right. Yeah.
So we just added all these,
So
additional
this is how
data
you
values.
make out. And so Matt, this is a cool one. So I know you like over at Synopsys, y'all are talking about like multiple clusters for multiple people. So Scott sort of solved that with TKGM customizations on Tanzu. Like he's got a recipe that he uses that will just roll out like, 50 clusters for people. And he just indexes stuff.
Exactly. So like here, one of the cool things is like autoscaler, for example, right? So if we look at the autoscaler code in Tanzu, if you said enable cluster autoscaler, and you didn't set autoscaler min size 0 to whatever or max size, it'll take the machine count. Now, just because someone is adding another machine deployment to their cluster, that doesn't mean that I want them to have to repeat every variable. So the nice thing in YTT is that we can actually come and say, okay, the annotation of cluster autoscaler, basically say, okay, if there is autoscaler min size at the place of I, so autoscaler min size 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever machine deployment they're creating here, awesome. If not, use worker machine count 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. If that doesn't exist, go and use worker machine count because that needed to exist for machine deployment 0. So this way we can actually play around and we can add in all these customizations here and just have it in a for loop here where they just set in additional MD count and say how many machine deployments, and automatically everything around cluster autoscaler, the amount of replicas, everything. And then also what we added, because it doesn't exist in TKG right now, is the ability to add node labels. So what if I wanted to have labels on my worker nodes, a specific label when they came up? And this becomes really important when I have multiple machine deployments, because if I have two sizes, one has GPUs, the other doesn't, one is large, the other is small, and I want to be able to target them accordingly. So here we're just creating an overlay on the kubeadm config template and just adding node labels automatically. And if they didn't give me a custom node label, I'm creating a node label of cluster API machine deployment with the machine deployment name. So they can either give me one, or I'm going to create one anyways, so that there is a way to distinct where this node came from within the cluster. But they can offer their own labels, and we can work with that as well.
Yeah, this is really cool if you're trying to roll out pave on an entire data center, or pave an entire family of clusters, which is increasingly important for developers, right?
Exactly. Anyways, so I hope this was helpful today.
This is this is the longest show we've done, and it's probably got the most content in it, and it's definitely probably the most practical, right? So I feel like we should do a follow-up, Scott, because I feel like I'm just you're just getting started here, but
more than happy to. Would love to come back and hang out some more.
Huge thanks to TerraSky for letting you share all this with us and do all this. And I like that you're sharing all your recipes out in the open. That's really cool.
And really just a call out to everyone that if anyone, has questions on any of this stuff, or, is trying and is getting stuck, feel free to reach out to me on all the social media channels and whatnot. I'm VRabbi everywhere is my, handle on the Kubernetes Slack, the VMware Code Slack, on everywhere. So really feel free to reach out and raise issues on the repo if there's any recipes that you'd be interested in. We'll take a look and see if we can build them out as well and share them to the community.
And Robert, we have a little bit of a Carvel show, but we didn't go deep into the Carvel tooling that configures Antrea specifically and how that's plumbed from TCE into framework and the life cycle of that. And a meme on my team here at VMware sort of owns all that, and I'm sure he'd be happy to walk folks through that. So
yeah, that would be awesome.
So Robert, hope to see you and you come back and hang out with us. And if y'all ever want to demo any of the other stuff over at TerraSky, we hang out all the time, so we can talk.
Yeah.
about it.
So Robert is from actually another company from ITQ, based in Holland. He's actually another Tanzu expert, and I hang out with him a lot. He's pretty awesome, and knows a lot of stuff in the Tanzu world. So yeah.
Okay, this is cool. So all right. So yeah, we'll do an Antrea a deeper dive into how we package it, how we ship it in framework, and how we're going to move towards shipping it upstream soon. Scott,
awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, all right,
thanks,
cool. So I'm going to end the broadcast. Thanks everybody for coming. Antrea Live. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays, everyone, and Happy New Year.